So their headline is fake news. That's fake news.
Dr. Ostfeld, thank you so much for doing this interview. I really, really appreciate it. First up, a bit of a random question, but has anybody told you sound like Kip Anderson from What the Health?
No, I've never heard that before, but I'll take it. He's done incredible things, so I'll be happy to be lumped with that. I get that I look like a lot of people. I get that all the time, which is interesting. I get stopped on the street like once a month. You look like this person, that person, but never sound like. So that's cool. It's a nice change.
Anyway, in this video, we're going to talk about the kind of perceived reasons a plant-based diet doesn't seem to work for a small number of people. First up, what positive benefits have you experienced eating a plant-based diet?
I started eating a plant-based diet maybe about 8 or 9 years ago, and I'm so happy I did it, and I'm not looking back. It's hard to pick just one amazing health turnaround that I've seen from plant-based nutrition, because I've seen so many. There's a woman whose heart was beating incredibly weakly. She was very ill. And with a combination of medications and a plant-based diet, her heart function recovered. There is the woman who was about 120 pounds overweight, diabetes, multiple medical problems, on 15 different medications. Went plant-based. Fast forward 9-10 months, she lost 90 pounds and she's only taking 2 medications. Her diabetes is gone and she feels so much better. But I also, of course, realized that in addition to it being incredibly healthful for my patients, it would be helpful for me as well. So I started doing it, not out of any particular specific health reason, but just because I figured it would be great to walk the walk and healthful for me in general. And so I wound up losing a few pounds. I have asthma, that got a little bit better. I mean, it was just great. And then I just had more energy and I felt great. So I'm really happy that I started a plant-based diet about 8 years ago. And it was spurred on by the China study. Thank you, Colin Campbell. And I'm not looking back.
I just want to talk about a couple of kind of plant-based YouTubers that have sort of ditched 100% plant-based diet and eating a few animal products. Not many, but eating a few animal products each week. I just wondered what your perspective is on this, and why do you think this is?
Yeah, well, I've never seen anyone get healthier when they adopted or eating more animal products. I've seen the opposite, when they eat more of a plant-based diet than an animal-based diet, but not the other way around. And so I think it's really careful to not get sucked in by an anecdote here or there, particularly when it comes to your health, when there's lots of great evidence out there to support what is or is not a healthy eating pattern. And if you take a 5,000-foot view, there's reams and reams, thousands of articles supporting how eating more toward a plant-based diet is better and less of an animal-based diet is better. And it seems the further you go toward a plant-based diet, the more and more benefit you accrue. So in terms of these particular people, I'm glad that they're feeling better, and that's wonderful. The first thing to think about is, of course, what kind of plant-based diet might they have been eating? Like, you could eat sugar cookies all day and you'll be plant-based, but no one's going to argue that that's healthy. Or you could eat kale all day and people would argue that that's healthy. There's a wonderful article by Dr. Satija out of Harvard where she looked specifically at that question, and she found that an unhealthful plant-based diet, basically sugar cookies, was as bad as an animal-based diet. But if you ate a healthful plant-based diet, kale, whole grains, etc., it was quite healthful. So first, the devil's in the details. What kind of plant-based diet were they eating? A healthful one or an unhealthful one? If you're eating an unhealthful one, I imagine if you shift a little bit, you might feel better.
Mm-hmm. I mean, are there hurdles that people have in terms of the way they feel when they start adopting a plant-based diet?
Yes, absolutely. And that ties in perfectly with the kinds of anecdotal experiences you're mentioning about long-term vegans incorporating some more animal products. One thing I not uncommonly see, particularly when people start out, is that they may feel a little bit fatigued or tired when they shift more toward a plant-based diet. And what is almost always the case is that they're just not eating enough, because before they had ate an incredibly calorically dense and very nutrient low diet, but they've shifted now to an incredibly nutrient dense but relatively calorically low diet. But they'll eat about the same amount of food. And so they're just not getting enough calories. So when they start eating more of the plant-based foods, like have 2 servings at dinner. If you're hungry, have a snack. Eat a bigger breakfast. They often then feel much stronger and much better. So it's possible that the type of vegan diet that the people that you were mentioning who are switching from vegan to more animal-based food, that type of diet they may have been having may not have been sufficiently nutrient dense or sufficiently calorically dense. There's a lot of reasons that those changes may have happened. And that's why it's so important to not get sucked in by the anecdote. The anecdote is a great thing to stimulate research. You know, we saw a cool case of this, a cool case of that. Maybe it's because of X, maybe because it's Y, maybe because it's because of Q, but we don't know until you study it. So the anecdote is interesting, but I wouldn't shuffle right behind that, of course, particularly when there are just tons of evidence supporting the benefits of a plant-based diet. When you have tons and tons of evidence supporting it, and you have one example that's not even published in the medical literature of it discounting that, where do you lean? Okay, sure, take it seriously, but think about it in the context of all of this.
But a lot of the research does show that a small amount of animal protein is negligible and it doesn't necessarily really affect human health. So I just want to explore the correlation between when you say the more plants people eat, the healthier they are. Like, how far do you go with that?
So what I mean is really the more toward a plant-based diet you're eating, the better. And if you look at a variety of epidemiologic studies, even Dr. Ornish's randomized controlled trial, the more of a plant-based diet you eat, a variety of metrics improve, whether it be blood pressure, whether it be shrinkage of cholesterol blockages in the heart, whether it be, say, for example, diabetes, cardiovascular health, stroke. Those things improve. Diet is indeed a continuum. A typical Western diet is very bad. A Mediterranean style diet, that's pretty good. And then if you take a deeper dive into the Mediterranean style diet, there's a really cool study where there was this randomized trial called PREDIMED, where they took thousands of people and randomized them to a Mediterranean style diet or a Western diet. And not surprisingly, the Mediterranean style diet did better. But people are like, well, if you eat more plants in the Mediterranean style diet, is that better? Is that worse? And what they did is they found that it's better. They looked, and the more plants you ate under the umbrella of a Mediterranean style diet, the better you did in terms of living longer. And that's been supported by other studies like the giant EPIC cohort, among others. So if you're going to talk about 97% whole food plant-based versus 100%, we don't honestly know exactly. We do know about one meal. So one unhealthful meal with animal products, like say a breakfast meat or fried potatoes or something, one unhealthful meal can worsen your blood vessel function for up to 6 hours. And then it gets better. That's one unhealthful meal. But then you know what happens next. Then it's lunch with some animal product, then it's dinner with pizza, and on it goes. It's meal after meal. It's like Mike Tyson is in there pounding away at your endothelial cells, and it's no wonder they give out over time. That's one unhealthful meal. But it's not just your blood vessel function, it's lung function. Asthmatics are more likely to get readmitted to the hospital if they eat that way. But you know what? It's not just your blood vessel function. It's not just your lung function. It's liver function. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is the #1 reason in the US for liver transplants, liver failure, more than alcohol. Well, if you eat an animal-based meal like we were just talking about, your liver metabolically looks like non-alcoholic fatty liver disease for like 6 hours. But you know what? It's not just your blood vessels. It's not just your lung function. It's not just your liver. It's your red blood cells too. The red blood cells carry oxygen in the blood from your lungs all over your body, to your brain, to your toes, everywhere, because they need oxygen. Well, if you eat one unhealthful meal, your red blood cells go from being these nice floppy things that can wiggle through all the small little capillaries to being spiky and having points or spikes on them. Who cares? Well, they're less floppy, but the other thing is there's this really interesting association with eating a big unhealthy meal and having a heart attack. And that could be multifactorial. But maybe one of those reasons is that those red blood cells that used to be all floppy now have little spikes, like little swords. And they can poke a little hole in the fibrous cap that's covering an atherosclerotic plaque in an artery and cause a heart attack. It's a hypothesis, but it's interesting. But that's one unhealthy meal. Now, speaking generally on population levels, you know, if you're 98%, we don't really know which is better. So if someone's having a couple of an animal product meals who's otherwise generally healthy a week, it's probably not bad from a health perspective. You know, there's obviously other issues, there's environmental ones, there are ethical ones, etc. But strictly from a health perspective, it's probably not that big of a deal. Now, if you already have pretty advanced disease, given the stuff we just mentioned, one unhealthy meal could really bring on some chest pressure, could bring on possibly even a heart attack. But you know, that's more the outlier sicker population. So from my perspective, the more toward a plant-based diet you get, the better you do. The people who I see as a cardiologist are generally enriched for disease. So I want them to go as much as possible. I don't want perfection to be the enemy of good. So for those people who are vegans and switched back and you know, maybe feel a little bit better, it's important to know that it's just an anecdote. Don't forget about it in the context of tons of other evidence. You know, perhaps they were not eating a healthful plant-based diet before. Maybe they were a junk food vegan. Maybe not. I don't know.
The people that I've seen on the social, or the one or two people, I'm acting like there's loads of people, just one or two people that I've seen that have sort of ditched 100% plant-based diet on social media, did consume a high fruit diet. What's your kind of take on fruit? Is it healthy?
Well, I think a lot of fruit is healthful, and there are plenty of studies to support that. You know, there was a really cool study out of China of about 450,000 people by Dr. Du, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and they had about 3.2 million person years of follow-up. And like if you follow me in a study for 1 year, that's 1 person year. But for this study, they had 3.2 million person years of follow-up. Okay, so what did they ask? They asked, if you ate more fresh fruit, did you do better? Did you do worse? What happened? Well, it turns out if you ate more fresh fruit, you did better. Fewer strokes, less heart attack, lower blood pressure, lower blood sugar. Yes, if you ate more fruit in this study, you had lower blood sugar and you were less likely to get diabetes. So I'm kind of tired about hearing about how fruit causes diabetes. And in fact, in this study, they had 30,000 people who had diabetes at the start of it. And even in them, if you ate more fresh fruit, you did better, you lived longer. So I think that eating lots of fruit is great. The one scenario that I get a little concerned about it, and it's a little bit out of my wheelhouse, if you will, because I'm a cardiologist and I generally see people enriched for disease, but the one situation I get a little concerned is if you are like a super high level athlete, like Olympic athlete, like amazing runner, you know, sometimes if you're really just only eating fruit, I wonder if you're at that high of a level of an athlete, are you meeting your protein requirements? So, for my patients, when they're having a varied whole food plant-based diet, whole grains, beans, lentils, fruits, vegetables, I don't even worry about it for a second because, you know, my patients enriched for disease, they're not going out and running an ultra marathon. But if you're doing that and you're eating only fruit, sometimes I wonder if you may not meet that particular nutrient need. It doesn't mean that you need to eat animal products to do that. You can have some beans, you can have some lentils, you can have some whole grains. So it's possible that that's an explanation. But, you know, everyone's a little bit different. And anecdotes are important to help us learn more, but don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, with all the incredible amounts of evidence supporting the more toward a plant-based diet you get, the better you do. For example, it's been hypothesized that if, let's just say everybody went plant-based, the costs for chronic disease, just think about it fiscally for a second, would go down by 80%. That's unbelievable. That's like trillions of dollars. Imagine what you could do with that in the world and how much healthier people would be. But what if they went 70% plant-based? That's still a lot of benefit. That's still a lot of savings. So that's great. We don't want perfection to be the enemy of good. And I think an issue with the vegan community is that we're sometimes a circular firing squad. And, like for the example that I like to think about is Beyonce. I think they went vegan again now, which is great, but...
Sorry to cut you off, but we literally just posted 20 minutes ago. Let me read out the thing. We posted on Instagram. From The Telegraph, which is a massive paper in the UK, Beyonce and Jay-Z offer free tickets for life to one fan who becomes a vegan.
Well, I mean, that's a beautiful incentive. And I think what they're doing is amazing. And, I could scream from the top of Montefiore till the end of time, and I won't reach as many people as one tweet from either one of them will. So I think it's terrific. But, I think Beyonce, a few years ago, she went, vegan for a month. And that's great. But by the circular firing squad, what I mean is there are people screaming, well, she's not vegan enough, or she's not doing it long enough. They were finding problem with that. But that should be celebrated. It's such an amazing message. And so someone's 99% vegan and not 100%. It's better than 12%. So I think we should celebrate our differences like that, be bigger tent, and move things along.
I guess maybe the implication of what you're saying is that for people that have sort of fallen off the vegan wagon, they're still plant-based, they're still consuming predominantly plant-based diet. I guess a good question to ask now would be, do you have any tips for these people and how they can sort of regain 100% plant-based diet if they want to?
But before I forget, what'll not uncommonly happen is when I'll see a patient and they'll go hopefully plant-based, and not everybody listens to me, of course, but I try. And maybe I'll get a call in a month, and they're like, "Oh, doc, I feel terrible. What happened? Last night I had a giant steak and all this stuff, and I just feel terrible." I'm kind of good. I'm glad, because it serves as a nice reminder about what can happen if you eat unhealthily. And these are people generally enriched for disease. But when people start, going back to more animal-based foods, some things that I like to talk with them about is, why are you doing it? What were your motivations? Is it health? Is it ethical? Is it environmental? Everyone has some different, combination of motivations. And sometimes they need a little punch in the arm, because society is geared to not be plant-based. And typically, the environment in which people live, their friends, their colleagues, their coworkers, they're typically not plant-based. The dinners people go to are not plant-based. They're often the outlier in almost every situation, which is unfortunate, and that's a societal level issue that people like you are helping to change, which is great. But, so that could wear on people after a while. So then, maybe they watch Forks Over Knives again. Maybe they watch Earthlings if the ethics really resonates with them. Maybe they watch Cowspiracy. Maybe they watch the new documentary films that are just coming out now, Code Blue, about medical education, or Game Changers, which is about the impact of plant-based nutrition for super high-level athletes, Olympians, professional athletes, and it's phenomenal. I think they did a tremendous job. They get into some of the evidence as to why eating this way is healthful, and they show incredible examples of how people started doing this and had all kinds of incredible improvements. And of course, it's all wrapped up in an incredibly entertaining bow. So I think it's a wonderful film, and I would encourage everybody to watch it. And if you watch it super duper closely, you will see the back of my head for about 1 second. So I have the honor of having the back of my head in that film for a solid second. I mean, just saying. So it's really wonderful, and I would encourage people to watch it.
how does it go one step further from previous documentaries like Forks Over Knives and What the Health?
I think what Game Changers really adds is it addresses a population that may not have been fully touched by these other films, although those films are wonderful too. And it's kind of the athlete who is maybe thinking, oh, I have to eat animal products to be strong and to be big and to push my athleticism to a whole other level, which is something that's potentially incredibly interesting for people in their teens, their 20s, their 30s. People are really trying to push athleticism and all that comes with it, push their athleticism and all that comes with it. And so what this film highlights is, in particular for people like that, or even a weekend warrior like me, why plant-based nutrition can really take you to another level. For example, when you eat plant-based foods, particularly like beets or dark green leafy vegetables, you can improve the efficiency of your mitochondria. Who cares? Well, mitochondria are the gas stations of our body. They give us fuel and they make ATP. ATP is our gasoline. That's what we run on. Well, turns out if you eat more plant-based foods like beets and green leafy vegetables, you make more ATP with the same amount of raw material. They're more efficient. That's good. Also, when you exercise, you have something called delayed onset muscle soreness. Like, you wake up the next day, you're like, oh, my quads are killing me. I just walked up 20 flights of stairs yesterday and whatever. Well, that delayed onset muscle soreness happens less when you eat plant-based nutrition because it's so rich in antioxidants and phytonutrients and happens less. So you know what? You can train again sooner. You recover more quickly. So that's just the tip of the iceberg of the things that they dive into in the Game Changers. So I think it's a wonderful film with lots of great examples in an entertaining way that I think is going to move the needle for people, particularly younger and with an athletic bent.
Hey everybody, this is Klaus. I just want to come in quickly and say, firstly, thank you very much for watching this video. Secondly, I wanted to talk very, very briefly about a new partnership. We partnered with a new group called NFI Diet. They provide whole food, plant-based meal guides that go a step further than anything in the past by completely personalizing them. The protocol's being studied at a national institute in Europe, and they're getting some amazing results, including rapid weight loss as well as type 2 diabetes remission, often within weeks. Please check out the link down below if you want to find out more. Hope you enjoy the rest of the video.
Have you had any patients on a plant-based diet with gut issues?
Yeah, so I've had a few patients complain about gut issues with a plant-based diet. And what I think it typically stems from, and it usually happens right when they start. And I think what that stems from is if someone's been eating more of a Western style diet, which is like really low in fiber, and then they shift to lots of beans and lentils and fruits and veggies, like their fiber intake is shooting way up. And that can lead to gas and indigestion. So what I'll do is, for those patients, we sometimes will say, well, you got to give your gut microbiome in your body a little time to get used to it. If it's not bothering you too much, hang in there. It'll probably get better in a couple of weeks. And that's usually what happens. But for some patients, we'll say, okay, let's just transition you. And instead of going all in whole food plant-based, we'll start, we'll go like 50, 60%. We'll just keep ramping it up as they're able to tolerate it more. So I typically like to have my patients go all in because, it breaks sort of like the addictive food issues they may have, and they accrue benefits very quickly, so it kind of sells itself. So I try to do that, but I don't want my sense of what I think is right to, obviate what is actually right. So I will have them, transition some. So it's usually around just starting high in fiber, gas, a little bit of indigestion, and so ramp down the fiber a little bit and slowly increase it. And either that or just waiting it out a little while typically takes care of it.
I want to ask a question about a specific ketogenic diet. It's called the Carnivore Diet. It's kind of trending on YouTube. It's not a paleo diet, of course. It's a meat only, so it's ketogenic. But it's where people eat just raw organ meat. What's your take on that?
Well, so, I mean, the first thing I think about is like, if I'm driving my car and then I see roadkill, I'm not like, ooh, dinner. You know, I'm like, that's kind of gross. And I try to not drive over it. So like, I would think if we're truly carnivores, you'd like pull over and grab dinner. So that's like kind of my 10,000 foot take on it. Why do they even want people to have tons of animal products, tons of fat? Well, if you look way back to the 1970s, right? Where there was this horrible government came out and said that you should eat a low-fat diet. And then they'll say, well, the government said that you should eat a low-fat diet. But look what happened. We're all fat, so it didn't work. Well, you know what? We didn't do that. We didn't eat a low-fat diet. We ate more of everything, including fat, and we got fat. So their headline is fake news. That's fake news. Fruits are healthy. Beans are healthy. Legumes are healthy. And you're not getting them. The longest living populations in the world eat those.
Just to be really, really clear, are there any nutrients in animal foods that can't be obtained via plant-based sources?
The only nutrient that I know of that you need that is found in animal-based foods and not plant-based foods is vitamin B12. And vitamin B12 lives in the soil. And animals have it because they either eat soil or other animals that ate soil. Now that our fruits and vegetables are so cleaned and washed, all the dirt that used to be on them and we used to eat to get B12 is gone. So we have to supplement that. And so I don't think that that's a reason to eat animal foods. That's just more a vestige of our kind of modern day society where soil is different and we've washed everything so much that we don't eat any soil anyway. And it's extremely easy to supplement. You can get one over the counter at any pharmacy here in the US. I imagine it's the same in the UK. And plenty of people who eat an animal-based diet are B12 deficient as well. Just because you eat animal foods doesn't mean you're not going to be B12 deficient. So I check it in all my patients, and I encourage people to have some B12 a few times a week. And the only time I've seen a numeric deficiency, I've never seen a clinical one, but a numeric one is when someone forgot to take his B12 for like 2 years.
And don't worry if there's any overlap, but I just wanted to ask you if you could just recap, what do you think are the leading reasons that some vegans go back to eating animal products?
You know, there's societal pressure. Our society is not geared to be plant-based. From the various social events you go to the work events you go to messaging all over the place, it's not geared to be plant-based. And if, you know, we are, what do they say? We are the sum of the 5 people we hang out with the most. You know, so if the 5 people that are hanging out with the most are not eating plant-based foods, it's possible that you would, you know, start eating fewer plant-based foods. So I think there is a societal level issue that makes people shift back. And I think, you know, it's important for people to stay in touch with why they chose to go plant-based in the first place. Is it so they could be healthier or environmental or ethical? And, you know, they have to revisit that from time to time because, you know, memories fade, focuses fade. You know, that's why people have a new 30-day challenge here or a new 1-year challenge there so that they can re-energize. So I think that those are some of the reasons that people shift away from eating a whole food plant-based diet. And I think one thing to think about when you're shifting away is if you look at a 500-foot view at the healthiest living populations in the world, the blue zones, the ones with the most centenarians, the longest living people, they eat primarily a plant-based diet, not exclusively, but primarily a plant-based diet. And we've talked about a lot of reasons why animal products aren't healthful. endothelial progenitor cells, trimethylamine oxide, new 5GC, saturated fat, cholesterol, inflammation, heme iron, on and on and on. But if you step back and you look at these big populations, I think what it highlights is that nutrition really is a symphony. And it's a symphony made up of tons of nutrients and tons of reactions and tons of enzymes interacting in a multiplicative number of ways, thousands of different ways, that when we look at one thing, the endothelial progenitor cell, that's just one piece of a giant puzzle that we're just barely scratching the surface of. So when you start stepping more toward animal-based foods, you're giving up some of that symphony of health. You know, like the new 5GC that we talked about. You know, maybe that's what the violin is doing, the microbiome. Maybe that's the drum. The trimethylamine oxide, maybe that's the cello. But there's tons of more instruments and there's tons of more people in the symphony. So I think it's wonderful that we're learning about why there are all these different mechanisms about why eating more plant-based nutrition is healthful. But if you step back, those blue zone populations, they are the symphony.